Modern-day paranormal investigators would tell you one of the most ubiquitous phenomena occurring in or around the dead or cemeteries is the observance of ghostly orbs. These orbs have been observed throughout various cultures around the world for thousands of years. Known to the Egyptians as sunboats and referred to in the Old Testament as the Merkaba, in schools of Jewish mysticism, including the Kabbalah, the Merkaba is the divine throne chariot described in the prophet Ezekiel's mystical experience and is associated with the heavenly realms. In modern times, they are regarded as interdimensional vehicles of the spirit. Tracy was a 28-year-old aspiring artist and newlywed living in California. She was married to 30-year-old Justin, a supervisor for a construction company. They had originally met on Facebook of all places, and after meeting in real life for the first time, the two quickly became inseparable, being engaged just 4 months after meeting. After 2 years of marriage, Justin became ill. At first, the couple believed Justin's illness to simply be the flu, as he was extremely lethargic, with fever and muscle pains. As days turned into weeks, Justin's symptoms only worsened, and on top of the stress of the illness, Justin received word from his employer that they would have to terminate his employment. Doctors were of little help, stating that tests revealed nothing abnormal and administered a prescription of antibiotics in case of infection. This proved to be useless in treating Justin's condition, as his symptoms were only worsening, and the couple grew frustrated at the low-quality medical care Justin was receiving. It didn't help that due to Justin's employment ending, he had to be seen at the community clinics, as the couple had no medical insurance. 8 months later, Justin succumbed to the wasting illness and passed away. Tracy withdrew from everyone. Family, friends. She could not have imagined the tremendous weight of the grief she was now experiencing from the loss of Justin. At least once a week, Tracy visited Justin's grave at the nearby cemetery. Often she would bring some of her artwork with her. Justin loved seeing Tracy's art, and she felt tremendous sadness at the thought of him not being a part of her passion any longer. On this particular day, Tracy had gone to the cemetery later than usual, and stayed longer than she usually did. And soon she realized it was evening, and the sun was falling quickly. She thought of Justin and his smiling face whenever he would come into the small bedroom they had converted into a studio and beheld Tracy's paintings. Tracy slightly smiled, and remembering Justin's reactions, his excitement was far more than her average artistic skills deserved, and yet he loved her art and was sincerely amazed by her talent. She loved him so much. Oddly, at that moment, Tracy noticed something in her peripheral sight. At first, when she turned to face it, nothing was there. But then it appeared again in the same location in her peripheral sight. This time, rather than turning completely to face it head-on, she slightly moved her head to keep the object in her peripheral sight, but enough so that she could focus on the object. This worked, but the object was strange. It was a slightly glowing orb about the size of a golf ball. Not glowing like a dim light bulb, more like an anomaly of light, dull and transparent, yet most certainly emitting light. It was tricky to keep it in focus, but after a few minutes watching, head tilted, keeping the orb in her periphery, she became adept at watching the orb. It moved slowly, more like it was drifting on the wind, except there was no wind. The orb hovered over a headstone some 50 feet away, and after about 20 minutes it suddenly faded and was gone. Tracy was amazed, perplexed, and fascinated. At the same time, she could not imagine what the object was, but it was most certainly a physical object, as she was convinced any eye condition or mild hallucination would surely not have lasted so long and with such a specific method of viewing it. Regardless of the mystery she had just witnessed, it was now dark, and while the moon was full, providing enough light to move about, Tracy began to feel some sense of urgency to leave. As she did, however, she noticed once again a ghostly orb, this time much closer, above one of the nearby graves. This orb she could see quite clearly. It was much larger, nearly the size of a grapefruit, and twice as bright. Bright would be the wrong description, however, as it was a pale, milky green color that was transparent and illuminated, though still in a bizarre way. The orb was still, but then began to move, and when it did, it moved much more quickly than the other, and Tracy found herself shocked by the sudden motion. It moved at a steady speed, perhaps as fast as Tracy could walk, and walk she did in an attempt to follow the orb. The orb drifted deeper into the cemetery, away from Justin's grave, away from almost all of the graves, to a point in the cemetery Tracy didn't even know existed. It was at the farthest edge of the cemetery, near the outer forest that surrounded the property. It was in this area some of the oldest graves existed. Many were mausoleums, and some of them appeared to be in disrepair, even vandalized. Graffiti and litter could be seen around a few of these tombs, and Tracy felt a sense of sadness at the blatant disrespect. The orb passed these tombs, however, and stopped near a mausoleum that was definitely one of the oldest Tracy had ever seen. While the mausoleum was in disrepair, it was not vandalized. The orb drifted behind this mausoleum, which butted up against tall weeds and scraggly trees. The dull light emanating from the orb was enough to illuminate the wall of the backside of the tomb, and revealed quite a large fractured portion of the wall. A large chunk of the wall was collapsed, revealing a sizable hole nearly 4 feet tall and perhaps 3 feet wide. The orb, which had stopped moving up until this point, began to slowly move again, and as Tracy watched in surprise, it drifted into the hole and entered the tomb. Tracy was confounded. She could see the dull orb barely illuminating a small portion of the tomb, but she couldn't believe what she was thinking. She knew entering the tomb was illegal, and more to the fact, it was completely out of character for her to even consider going in. And yet, she did. Inside the mausoleum was sparse. The entire interior was about the size of a small bedroom, perhaps 10 feet wide and 12 feet long. The orb was floating just above an ornate coffin. Seeing this coffin confirmed the age of the mausoleum. It was old, very old. Tracy estimated it to be from the early 19th century. It was rusted and dust covered everything. The orb was still motionless, hovering some 3 feet above the casket, illuminating it partially, creating quite a creepy scene. Then suddenly, the orb descended straight down into the casket and disappeared. Tracy was stunned. The speed was startling, and the tomb was pitch dark except for dull moonlight streaming in from the hole in the wall. Then she heard something, a clunking sound, very brief, but definitely from inside the tomb. She realized there was probably animals here, perhaps even rats that were in the tomb with her, and that thought gave her reason to begin inching back away from the casket and toward the hole in the wall. But then it came again, this time much louder, the clunk and thud sound. It was so loud, in fact, that Tracy stopped and squinted in the darkness and dull moonlight to try to locate the source. As she stared, the sound came again, and this time the sound was so loud and from one obvious location that Tracy's heart nearly stopped. The sound was coming from the casket. Suddenly, the horrific reality of Tracy's situation flooded into her mind. She was absolutely alone in the dark. Inside of a tomb she had entered illegally, having found her way there by following a ghostly orb, and now that orb had entered a coffin that was making sounds. Tracy screamed a scream she didn't know she was capable of making, and leapt, stumbling and groping, for the hole in the wall. She reached it, and as she pressed against the sides of the hole, which was barely wide enough for her slender body to fit through, her head scraped against the jagged stone, forming a bleeding laceration. She cleared the hole and exited the mausoleum, running as fast as she could in the dark cemetery under the full moon, all the while holding her hand over her wound while it bled profusely. As she ran, all she could think was, "What is happening? What is happening?" But the darkness gave no answer.